All right, everyone, let's get going on today's course. So as promised, today we have our special guest, Erica Zinda, and she is here to take us through what we need to do for our IRB protocol, what kind of things we need to consider, and then also at the end to just provide any additional answers for questions that you might have. All right, so Erica.
Right, so as I go through, think about your projects, because I'm going to talk about the things that the IRB needs to know in order to make a determination. So think about your project and how you would answer some of the questions, and that way you can ask me, I don't know what to do about this. And I understand that you've already taken the city training. Is that, I'm getting shaking heads up and down and back and forth. I don't know which one it is. That's the human subjects training. Okay.
That was one of our first assignments. So
right. So my first couple of slides, usually it's leading students into taking the city training. So I'll just go through them pretty quickly since you already know why the IRB exists. That's what that city training, it covered the history of research in the United States and abroad and why there are issues that we need to be looking at what researchers are doing so that there's a second set of eyes on the research and not somebody saying, this is really great. It might be really great, but we have to make sure that we are not taking advantage of people. The three basic principles that the IRB runs on are respect, beneficence, and justice. Respect for your subjects, that they get to say, yes, I want to participate in your study, or no, I do not want to participate in your study. Beneficence, that you do more benefit than you do harm. There is some harmful research that takes place, or potentially harmful, usually in medical settings, not usually in our setting. But as long as the benefit of that research would outweigh the risks of the research can usually go forward. And justice, in that you're choosing your subjects in a way that isn't giving all of the risk to one group or all of the benefit to one group. So those are the principles you have to keep in mind. And if you did the city training, you recognize the Belmont report that set out the basic ethical principles of respect, beneficence, and justice. And what is research? Research is a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, evaluation, design, to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. And this is the definition of human subjects research. Other people would say, but mine is research and it doesn't fit this definition. This is only relevant to the IRB. And then what's a human subject? It's identifiable information, basically, that you're gathering about an individual, whether through interaction with the individual or gathering data from other sources, if it's private, identifiable information. And the Institutional Review Board is the committee set up at many institutions to review this type of research to make sure that everybody is being treated ethically. What the IRB review assures that informed consent will be sought and documented. That's the respect principle. That risks to subjects are minimized and reasonable in relation to anticipated benefits. That's the beneficence principle. And that the selection of subjects is equitable. That's the justice principle. We have to monitor the data to make sure that the safety of subjects continues throughout the lifetime of a study. Some of these studies can go on 10, 20 years. And the IRB has to stay involved to make sure that any personnel changes, any changes to the protocol all meet with the same principles. And that additional safeguards are in place to protect subjects vulnerable to coercion. So there are special provisions put in place for children who can't give consent on their own, for those with diminished capacity that also can't give consent on their own, so that they have somebody else looking out for them. Specifically with children, I deal a lot with the School of Education, and they're out in the schools doing their research, and the kids just want to please you. Sure, I'll take part. That's why we got to have the parent involved as well, saying, wait a minute, this looks kind of fishy. So what the IRB needs to know, and what we will gather on the forms that were made available to you in Canvas that we'll be using specifically for this class. Why are you doing the research? What are you hoping to learn? So we need to know, what is it that you're trying to get at? And the only reason we would need to know this is usually if there's any risk involved. We have to say, they're not going to get to that research question based on what they're doing. And if they're wasting people's time, if there are any other risks involved, we would say, change the research somehow to make this better. And what interactions will take place as part of the research? What will the human subjects be doing? Will they be completing an online survey, participating in an interview, or having blood drawn? Each of those would constitute private personal information, and we would need to know exactly what they're going to be asked to do. We need to know about your recruitment. This is usually a sticking point, and I'll get answers like, well, I'm going to ask other people to be in my research. That doesn't give me nearly enough information to make a determination on how you're recruiting your subjects. So I need to know, what's the criteria for participation? Do they have to be in a certain age group? Do they have to be a certain gender? Do they have to live in a certain spot? Do they have to be enrolled in the university? How are you going to pick which people you invite to be part of your research? And then how are you going to find those people? How are you going to know this? I mean, if you're just watching people walk by in the courtyard, how do you know this one is in the right age group? How are you going to identify potential people to ask to be part of your research? And then how will they be invited to participate in your research? We need a script. This is what I'm going to say, because saying I'm doing a research study as part of my class, if you're interested, I can tell you some more about it, is very different than, oh God, I just need to get out of this class. Please, can you take part in this? Please, I'm going to fail if you don't take. That might be considered coercive. So how are you going to? So, and same thing with an email. I'm going to send an email. We've got to see the email. We have to see exactly what it says, so how you're going to invite them to participate. Then how will they get the information they need to decide? Because you're just inviting them at that point. And then can say, yes, you can give me more information. Then how are they going to get that information? Are they going to sit down and talk to you? Are you going to send them a consent document? Is your survey going to have the consent document with all of the information as the first thing, and then they get to decide by clicking next? So how are they going to get that information? And we need to know that they're going to have enough time to consider it. If you're doing something that's potentially risky, and I'm going to hand them the consent document, and then I'm going to sit there. Are you done yet? Have you read it? Are you going to sign it? That can be considered coercive. We have to know that they're going to have enough time to consider all of the things that you've put out there, whether or not they want to participate in your research. And then we need to know if you have any conflicts of interest. I once had a student in the School of Education put forth this survey for teachers, and they were going to ask them all of this stuff about how they liked these certain classes. And we went through the entire thing, and this is how we're going to invite them. This is what we're going to say. We're going to give them enough time. Turns out this was the principal of the school. No one was going to say no, because it was the principal of their school asking them to take part in the research. But we didn't know that. So we have to ask, do you have any potential conflict of interest with these subjects? Do you hold any power over these subjects? And it's the same thing if we have a faculty member doing research. It's really hard for them to do research in their own classes because they hold power over the students in their own classes. And so there are special safeguards that come into play with that. It's not that they can't do it, but it's a little more difficult. And we have to know about that potential conflict of interest. And this didn't used to be something we had on our forms until we had this problem. Maybe this is something we should ask. Oh, how are you related to these subjects? And then we need to know about your consent process. You're going to have a sample informed consent that you can use. It's not plagiarism. I'm offering it freely. Use it, but make it make sense for your study. We have to know that it's presented in a way that is understandable to the subject population. So if your subject population may only speak Spanish, I'm going to have to see that form first in English so that I can understand it, and then translate it into Spanish. If your subject population has any kind of diminished capacity, usually we want informed consents written at about an 8th grade level. May need to go down. If you're dealing with a subject population that can't understand what that is, and we have experts that look at this, then we have to make sure that it's understandable so that they're not just signing off on it without understanding what the research is. Answering questions to make sure they understand. There always has to be a possibility of them coming back after they've read it and said, what does it mean that you're going to stick bamboo shoots under my fingernails? How far under my fingernails? Okay? They have to be able to, you have to make that accommodation. If you have any questions, contact me here, or see me here, or email me here. You have to give sufficient time to consider the participation. And you have to have voluntary agreement. For most of your studies, that's as simple as clicking next on the survey or closing their browser. That's a voluntary act. They're not automatically taking part in your research just because they read the consent form. They are taking an action of hitting the next button to actually get to the survey. And allowing withdrawal at any time. Again, if you're doing an online survey, the way that's going to look is it's going to say, if at any time you feel uncomfortable and do not want to participate, simply close your browser. If you're doing it face-to-face, you can say, you can hand in a partially complete or completely blank survey. If they don't want to tell you, if they're uncomfortable saying, I don't want to do this, you can pretend to do it. Fold up a completely blank survey and hand it in. Absolutely acceptable. Or if you're not in the room, if you don't want to take part, simply discard the survey. Something that gives them an out. Keeping in mind that if you have an anonymous survey, which I assume will be a lot of you, hopefully, you can't say, we used to have this written in there, that you can withdraw at any time. And then somebody said, after they turn it in, how can they withdraw? So we have that right in the consent document. It says, once you have submitted your survey, since we can't identify it, you will not be able to withdraw at that time. And then they get to make that choice. Oh, I'm not comfortable with that. I'm not going to take part. Or, sure, that's fine. I can take part. It's all about giving them that respect of deciding whether or not they want to participate in your study based on what's going to happen. Oops. What needs to go in the consent? Very first thing is that it's research. You are invited to participate in a research study. I think Dr. Yurichevich is going to make these slides available on Canvas, so you don't have to write down everything. I hated taking notes in school. So the first statement is always, you are invited to participate in a research study. That differentiates it from propaganda, from marketing. You're invited to participate in a research study. You have to describe if there's any potential risks. More than likely, what your risk section will say is, we do not anticipate any risks associated with this study. But if there are, you would have to put them in there. And a description of any potential benefits. Again, your benefits section will likely say, we do not anticipate any benefit to you from taking part in this research. And benefit is different than compensation. If you're working with a psychology pool, you're probably offering 3 enrichment points or some such. That's compensation. That's not a benefit. A benefit to taking part in the research is if you take part in this clinical study on curing cancer, a potential benefit is we might cure your cancer. That's a benefit. It's very, very rare for us to have direct benefits associated with the research we do on our campus. Disclosure of any appropriate alternatives. It's not likely to be part of what you do, but that's if I'm trying to study this heart thingy to help people with heart thingy problems. And there's already a heart thingy over here that does pretty good. But if they don't know that, they may be coerced into taking part in your study thinking it's the only thing available. So you have to tell them this other thing is available, but I think mine is better. And here's why. And then they get to decide this is the way I want to manage my own care. The description of the extent, if any, to which confidentiality will be maintained. You don't have to maintain confidentiality. You can say, I'm going to use your name in all of my reports. Then they get to decide, well, I don't want that. I'm not going to take part in your study. Or you can say, I will do everything in my power to maintain confidentiality. I'm going to not ask for any names as part of the survey. If I have to have any identifiable information, I will make sure that it's not available to anyone else. I will be the only one that holds that information. Keeping in mind that identifiable information is not confined to names and social security numbers. It can be anything that could potentially identify someone. If you're asking them to do a writing prompt and they put in the writing prompt that I sang the national anthem at the Notre Dame game on Sunday, completely identifiable. You can go back and look and see who that was. So you have to show them, this is how I'm going to look for those kinds of things that may make you identifiable and leave those out of my study report. Or I'm only going to report things in aggregate, not as individual. 5 of the 25 people that took part in my study said this, not this person said this person said this, etc. You have to have contact information in your consent document. They have to be able to contact you with any questions, and since you're students, they have to be able to contact your faculty member if they don't feel comfortable contacting you. And you have to have a statement that this is absolutely voluntary. They do not have to participate in your study. If you're doing the compensation, there are other ways to earn the compensation. They don't have to take part in your study to get that compensation. Make sense? What else do we need to know? We need to know about risks and benefits. Risks may be physical, psychological, social, legal, financial. There's all kinds of different risks. Again, I'm hoping that your risk statement will say, we do not anticipate any risks associated with this study. You have to show that there are safeguards for protecting or minimizing potential risks. If there are risks, you can't just say, you might, get a concussion by taking part in my study. It's like, and then what? Do you have the means of taking care of them? If that happens, what if the risk comes into play? Then what will happen? What are the safeguards you're putting in place? That you have data protection, that your data is not going to be compromised, that you know where your data is going to be, and you know how to manage it so that nobody else will have access to it. That physical privacy during recruitment and participation comes into play. Again, this is if you're not giving out names and numbers, but if you're recruiting for a study on domestic violence and you're pinpointing who to recruit, somebody could see that and it could compromise that person's safety. So you have to show that you can maintain privacy for the person, both during recruitment and participation. If you're doing a study on sexually transmitted diseases and your follow-up method is to call them, and you call them and somebody else answers and you say, yeah, I need to talk to Johnny about the sexually transmitted disease study that he's part of. Yeah, no privacy there. So we have to know all of these things in advance, and you have to think through all of these things in advance. Okay? So if there are any benefits to the subject, again, unlikely your benefits section will probably say we do not anticipate any benefits associated or potential benefits to society or science. We're hoping to contribute to the field of XYZ with our study. Make sense? Okay. When we're reviewing, we're looking to see that the research holds no more than a minimal risk, that the selection of subjects is equitable, that it makes sense for your study. If you're recording any identifiable information, we need to know that there are provisions and safeguards in place for that identifiable information. That the consent process gives adequate information for potential subjects to decide for themselves whether or not they want to participate, and that there are adequate provisions for privacy. That's the gist of it. Now, if you've looked at the form that Dr. Yurchevich put on Canvas, have you all looked at that form? It gets at all of those questions. So we need the project title. That's usually just for consistency's sake, and it tells us really what you want to do. Describe the purpose of the project. What are you hoping to find? What's your research question? Describe all project interactions and provide an anticipated end date of the research. And then it goes through the recruitment, the risks and benefits, etc. Thinking through your own projects, are there any questions on how this might work? Are you all doing online surveys? No? What are you doing?
I'm doing interviews.
Okay. About?
Political creation and how it develops.
Okay. There is something that people might want privacy. Are you inviting them up here to the psych lab, or are you going to them? That's something that the IRB will need to know in order to determine what the privacy will be, and what we need to know what your selection of subjects will be beyond my grandmother's house at Sunday dinner. I'll invite everybody there to participate in my study. That's a justice issue. You're heaping it all on this group when this group has nothing special to do with your research. There's no reason for that group to be singled out over other groups. Anybody else? If you are doing online surveys, are you using the Qualtrics program? Okay. So I need the URL to be able to review this. I mean, so beyond all of the stuff about recruitment and beneficence and justice, etc., we actually need to see what you're asking to make sure that it follows and makes sense and there's no added risks based on what you're asking. We did have somebody doing one like on religious affiliation, and after going through all of these seemingly innocuous questions, they started asking about their sex life. Wait a minute, what research question are you getting at here? What? Well, I just thought it would be interesting to know based on religious affiliation, but you didn't tell them any of that. You don't want your subjects to be surprised when they get into your study that suddenly you're asking them things that you didn't cover in the consent document. Because the consent document's going to say, I'm doing a study about this. And I'm going to ask you questions like this. I'm going to ask you to read 20 pages of text before answering 2 questions. Do I really want to do that? That's a pretty big time commitment. So that you don't want your subjects to be surprised. And that's something that the IRB will be looking for, to make sure that what your survey is about is actually what you put in your consent document. Does that give anyone pause? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm kind of like, I'm doing online conformity. People conform online. How different it is to face-to-face. And I don't necessarily want them to know
Right
away.
That's what I was wondering, if it would give any. There are ways to do that. I mean, you still don't want them to be surprised at what they're being asked. But you don't have to necessarily give away what your research question is. So you need to give them enough information so that they can decide. And then it also might be that you have to give them something afterwards. It says, this is what my study was really about. And if you want more information about this, contact me, or here are some links that you can go to. Because that's usually the question we get asked. But I don't want them to know what I'm doing. I want to be sneaky. No, we understand that. And working with your faculty sponsor here, he can help you with wording that in such a way that it's, again, not surprising your subject when they go in and look. You don't want to say, well, I'm really studying what their sex life is about, but I'm going to tell them I'm studying about their religion. That would get really tricky, but you want to be able to tell them in advance what they're in for, as far as what they're doing as part of the study, not necessarily what your conclusion or what your research question is about.
So I think one way to think about that is you're going to inform them what they're going to be doing, but you don't need to inform them why you're having them do that. So in your case, you're going to be asking them to answer certain questions, to fill out certain, to read certain things and answer certain questions. You need to tell them that. You're going to be reading stuff about this, you're going to be answering questions about this, but you don't have to say that, oh, I'm doing this to study conformity, because then that will invalidate your study, because then they'll be alerted that
they might answer a different way. Yes.
But you definitely will tell them, you're going to be reading this,
passages about
questions here. Yeah, it'll be about this. So what they will do, you describe to them, but not why you're necessarily having them do it.
And if there's just one of the things I ran into last semester, some of the students wanted to evoke a positive or negative feeling in their subject before they did a task. And they had them watch videos to evoke these feelings. And of course, I asked for the URLs for the videos. I was very, very sorry I did that. I couldn't get through the first minute of the video that they wanted to show to evoke a bad feeling. It was really, really bad feelings. And I couldn't say that they couldn't do it, but I highly suggested to their faculty members, maybe you want to find something a little tamer to evoke a bad feeling. And so kind of keep that in mind. We had somebody doing music. We had to have a URL basically to Pandora or something that we could listen to the music. One of those, it was pretty offensive rap music, and it's like, fine, but you got to tell them. You might be listening to some really objectionable music, or music that you find objectionable. If at any time you feel uncomfortable, you can stop the study, or you can ask the researcher to stop the music or whatever it is that's part of it. Yeah.
So is that something you'd say explicitly in the informed consent?
Yes.
So saying you might have feelings of whatever, like that's the intention,
Yep.
and if you feel uncomfortable anytime, you can
Absolutely. Yeah, that's part of the voluntary. This is absolutely voluntary. And you might encounter these uncomfortable things. Yeah.
That leads to another question. Would that be considered a risk, or like if it doesn't go beyond what they might experience in their normal lives? Is it considered
We have put it in the risk section usually. Just basically saying you might encounter, and you don't even have to be explicit. Again, it might bias your study one way or another, but you have to say you may feel uncomfortable during certain portions of this. You can stop. It's not that you may feel uncomfortable, but power through. They may power through and enhance your study, but they can also stop. Yeah, I could not hit stop fast enough on the video.
I'll just add a little bit to that. So that's a good example of why I always encourage whenever anybody's doing research, if you can use previously used materials that have been shown to have an effect, number one, it gives you a little bit more confidence that it is going to be an ethical study, because
It's
in order
been
for it to
validated.
be,
Yeah.
it's already been validated. But the other thing is that you know it's not going to be, chances are it's going to be enough, but not too much. So I'm sure that video was probably one of the most extreme videos that they chose, and that kind of raises the risk to a level that it didn't need to be for that research. So if you can find inductions, procedures, or things that have been used before, you can go forward and have confidence that, hey, it worked for these other 12 studies. I'm going to use it for mine. It got approved for those other 12 studies, probably going to be ethical in my situation as well. And then rather than finding your own, where now you're like, is it strong enough, or am I putting my subjects at risk that's not required? So as much as you can, look for those procedures that other researchers have used. And much like Erica said, it's not plagiarism. Cite them in your final
and cite it in your IRB.
Yeah.
This is why I chose these videos. That's helpful to us, because I don't know everything that's been validated in psychology, every instrument and things like that. But if you cite it in your IRB, I can go and look and say, oh, I see, these people have also used this, and it did predictably evoke a bad feeling in the participant who then went on to do whatever task. I think it was even math. It was just silly. Do you do math better when you're really pissed off or when you're very happy? I don't know. I didn't even see the end of the study. But the happy video was that you bit my finger, Charlie.
Oh yeah.
And to compensate for the bad video, they said at the end, since they didn't want them to go away feeling bad, they were going to show them the happy video. And I wrote to the faculty member, I said, no amount of bit my finger, Charlie, is going to get me out that video.
I kind of want to know what the video is, but I kind of don't.
It was animal abuse, and it was
okay.
just awful.
That's enough of that.
Yeah.
That's enough of a negative.
I'm withdrawn from this study.
That's right. And that was the other thing. You're not going to get anybody to stay in your study. You're going to have people, clicking out of that, boom, I'm done, and you're not going to get valid results. You're not going to get a good database or for your results, because people are going to be done. Any other things you'd like to talk about with your study to make sure it can fall within these parameters?
Well, while we're thinking about that, is there any kind of general procedures that the IRB would like to see included in this information? So I know for recruitment, every single recruitment protocol I ever sent in, 18 years or older was one of the criteria.
Yeah.
So is there anything like that?
Right, you can't, that's part of working with children. If you don't include the 18 years or older, then you have to go through a completely different protocol, because then you're allowing children to take place. And so, that does have to be that's part of your criteria. We talked a little bit about the criteria for participating in your study. At the very least, that's going to say participants must be at least 18 years or older.
And we are also going to have Professor Talcott come in here to talk us through the SONA system.
Good.
So one other criteria that is often used is IUSB, enrolled at IUSB. That does not include necessarily 18 years or older.
Right.
We do have some fast track students in here, so definitely in the criteria for recruitment, 18 years or older will have to be one of those.
Now, for the SONA system, you're going to submit a screenshot, basically, of your SONA sign-in page. A lot of people include a URL, but I can't get to those URLs. You have to actually be enrolled in this class to get to those URLs. So you would send me a screenshot and make sure that it matches what you have in your IRB, because I'm going to be comparing it. So if you say in your IRB, you say they have to be at least 18 years old and enrolled in college. But on your SONA sign-up sheet, it says they have to be 18 years old and enrolled in an introductory psych class at IUSB. Those aren't the same. So just make them the same. They're going to ask you about the duration of your study. Make sure it's the same as what you told me in the IRB. We get that a lot too. And it's usually that you're thinking and thinking and thinking, and you already completed this document, and now you're completing this document, and maybe it'll take 25 minutes instead of 10 minutes. And so you put 25 minutes over here, but on this document, you still say 10 minutes. So then I have to say, which one is it? Don't make me work too hard.
Another one that I thought would be very helpful, in terms of handling data, are there some practices that you identify as, like, if you're doing a Qualtrics, this is something that we consider safe enough. If you're doing face-to-face, this is what we consider safe enough?
Qualtrics is a really nice system. It's better. We used to use the SurveyMonkey, but the SurveyMonkey was paid for by the department. So anyone in the department could see the data. And so we had to put that in the consent document. But with Qualtrics, you're the only one. You would set up your own account in Qualtrics, and you're the only one that can see that data. And as long as you're not asking for identifiable information, that's fine. That data is perfectly safe. If you are asking for names or anything else identifiable or potentially risky, we want to make sure that you're not downloading that onto a thumb drive that you're then carrying around in your backpack and maybe losing in the cafeteria, things like that. So keeping the data on the in your own drive, personal password protected drive, is perfectly fine. If you're doing face-to-face interviews, again, if you'll have any identifiable information, then you have to be very careful. But otherwise, we have to know, when are you transcribing that? Are you video recording? Are you audio recording? Are you just taking notes? Are they just filling out a form? What's happening with because you're more likely to have something physical if you're doing face-to-face, and what's happening with that? When are you transcribing it? And we're really mostly concerned if there's identifiable information and if there's anything potentially risky that you're asking. What's the potential risk if this information gets out? If you walk away with the interview notes and you drop them someplace, what is the potential risk for that disclosure? We don't require that you keep it on your person at all times. We actually really had somebody tell me that I will keep it on my person at all times. Really? You got a waterproof backpack that you're taking your shower with your, really? No, just take normal precautions are perfectly fine. If there's any risk involved, we will look at them a little more closely to make sure that the information can't or won't be disclosed. And then what are you doing with it? Are you then shredding it? Once you've transcribed it into a document in your password protected drive, are you shredding what you have? Are you holding on to it forever? You can. You need to tell your potential subjects if you are. Okay, so yeah, having something tangible is a little bit trickier than just the Qualtrics survey. But again, it's letting your subjects know, this is what I'm going to do with this data, including I may do research down the line. I want to keep this data so that I can use it. You can't do that unless you told your subjects in the consent document, I may do research at some point down the line. I plan to keep this data forever and potentially use it in other research projects. Then they get to decide, no, I don't really want this data out there forever. Again, depending on what the subject matter is, they may decide one way or another. But it's giving them the choice. It's respecting their autonomy in deciding what happens with their personal private information. Anything else you can think of, Igor?
In terms of, I don't know if it was on the forms that we are adopting for this class, but in terms of, was there a section on who's going to see the information?
Well, that's all part of the privacy.
Part of the privacy.
And that could be, I don't know if you have to provide raw data.
Okay.
Sometimes we'll have student researchers say only my professor and I will see this data. But more than likely, no one else will see the raw data. They would just see the results. And we talked a little bit about providing that in aggregate, or if you're doing interviews, let's say, might you use quotes? You have to tell them that, because that could potentially be identifiable. It's possibly not identifiable to you, but it might be identifiable to other people. And that gets into who's going to see your results. So if that's the case, if you might be using quotes, it would be good to say in your consent document, my results will be on a poster that will be displayed in the psychology department hallway at the end of the semester. And that way that person gets to decide, one, do I even want to have my information potentially displayed that way? And it might change how they answer some of the questions. So you have to keep that in mind as you go through, because using quotes is different than using aggregate information. And how you identify the quotes makes a difference. If you interviewed 500 people in the Michiana area and you said a single mother of 3 said this, it's very different than I interviewed 10 people that live in River Park and the single mother of 3 said this. So knowing your sample size, and that's all things that your subjects will have to know in order to make an informed decision about whether to participate or not. Does that make sense?
So in terms of the privacy and who's going to see your data, mention what's going to happen with the aggregate data. So most of you will be reporting averages and standard deviations and basically descriptive statistics on your data. So that's going to be going into your final research report. That's going to be presented at the URC. That's going to be on a poster outside in the hallway. For your raw data, you will see it yourself. Include me as well as somebody who will take a look at your raw data. Now, I might not, but if you want help with stats later on, please include me on that protocol.
Yeah, it's a good idea to just say he may see the data.
Yeah, because again, to do the final reports, you will be reporting aggregate data. But if there are questions on stats and you need something, you drop by an office hour and you say, hey, Dr. Yudich, here are my, here's the raw data from my study. We will not be violating any protocols because it will have been in that statement. Dr. Yudich will be looking at raw data.
Right.
So.
Okay. There's a lot to this, but it's absolutely doable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not mean. Actually, these work a little bit different. What's going to happen is once I've reviewed it, I'm going to send it back to Dr. Yuricevich and he will pass on the notes to you. But I used to send things directly to the students and they all thought I was so mean because I would say, you have to change this, you have to change this. I need more information about this. And it was all matter of fact because I'm trying to go through 20, 30 of these protocols. Oh, she hates my research. I didn't say that. I said I need more information about this. I need more.
I actually just yesterday was working through a student's manuscript that they were preparing, and I made extensive comments, and I sent them the attachment. And in there, I said, read these comments in the friendliest sounding voice possible.
That's what I should have added.
I realized that when you say things like grammar, change this, explain here, what do you mean by this? It sounds harsh, but it's really not. I'm trying to get the best writing out of this student, and it would have taken forever if every single comment I had to be like, well, this was
I really like
effort.
this, but
I like this a lot. Let me get the compliment sandwich going.
It's like I don't have time for that.
So bear that in mind. I think any comments that you get from any feedback, read it in your friendliest voice possible, and usually that'll help keep your spirits up a little bit. So.
Any other questions? Okay. Do we have a timeline before?
Well, We do. Let me see, bring this up. So I wanted, and this might be, where is that thing? Yes. So the IRB protocol was to be handed in to me at next week.
Okay.
On the 31st.
Okay.
And then I'll do a basic check, just make sure
good,
nothing ludicrous is there, and then I'll send it on to you. But
okay.
Yeah, so in a week, those forms, so the forms that were sent in, were uploaded to Canvas. One of them is that subject information sheet. Use that as a template, right?
Yes.
It lists all the information that needs to be in there. So just go through it, and then as it goes through, it'll say, oh, this is how long this study is going to take, and think to yourself, well, how long is my study going to take? Let me fix that information there. So use this the subject information sheet as a template, fill it in with your own information. The other upload was the form. That was where the questions that Erica was going through came from. So fill that out and provide the information that you need. People with Qualtrics, I will be requiring that link to your Qualtrics survey. People with face-to-face experiments, we will need your stimuli. So the questions that you're going to be asking, just you can put it as an attachment, and then that's all going to be handed in by the 31st. Now we haven't had Professor Talcott come in yet. Do they need that SONA before it can go to you? Okay, so we'll get Professor Talcott to come in so we can handle the SONA things. Mm-hmm.
So if we're using Qualtrics for a survey, then we have to have our survey complete by next Thursday as well.
Yes. At the very least, it's going to take me a little bit of time to go through these. So you might have bought yourself maybe 12 hours. But definitely, I mean, we're getting to the stage now where we want to have things finalized, things put together.
Right.
And before this can get approved to move on, we have to be exact on what we're doing. So, yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've had faculty actually ask, I just want to get the IRB out of the way and then I'll put together a survey. And it's like, no, we're not approving something we haven't seen. We can't just say, sure, you're fine.
You don't know what video is going to be inserted.
Right, and then they insert this video.
Right? Change the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, well, I look forward to seeing your projects, and you have my information.
Yep.
Someplace in Canvas, feel free to call me if you have any questions.
Thanks so much. Thanks for coming by. All right, so that's what we wanted to cover for today. Any questions about? Yep.
Okay. I have did you pass around an attendance sheet?
I did. Where's that at?
I have it.
Okay. It's on its way.
Just wanted to check.
Yeah, I know. I forgot. So I forgot it last time. So I'm giving everybody attendance for last time.
Okay.
But I remembered it this time. So we'll do that. So yeah, so continue working on your methodologies, get everything set, get everything done. Look at the subject information sheet. If you're doing your experiment in Qualtrics, the subject information sheet is typically the first page that opens up when you click your link. So if you've already put in, started putting in your survey, started putting in your different stimuli, just insert a question at the beginning of that. That's a subject information sheet, and just have, you can just have a link at the bottom that says, I agree, that takes them to the next question, or I do not agree, which takes them to the end of the survey, something like that. Use that flow. But that's going to be the first one. If you're doing face-to-face, that'll be the first thing that you hand to subjects. And typically, if you're doing face-to-face, what they recommend, what the procedure is, and I will look to see if I can upload some of those typical procedures. for face-to-face and for online studies. But typically for a study subject information sheet, you hand it to the subject, you leave the room for however many minutes you think it takes a regular person to read that, and then you knock on the door and ask them, are you finished? That's typically seen as an acceptable, non-coercive form for the subject information sheet. So once that is done, the rest of it is your actual experiment. And then once it ends, you typically just have in Qualtrics, thank you, and your survey's done. And in face-to-face, you just let them know what to do once they're completed their survey. And what we're going to do, because I'm going to try to get, I've told asked Professor Talgat to come in here next week. And I know we have to get the SONA sheets in before we send that off to Erica, but we'll definitely should be able to get the IRB protocols done. And then if I have to send that off to Erica, maybe first week of February, because we just have to get those SONA information, then we'll just do it that way. So, but definitely, I mean, the SONA sheet, Professor Talca was telling me she'll need like 15 minutes to run you through the SONA system and let you know what you need for that sheet. And it literally is just take a look at your subject information sheet and just copy that information to where it goes in the SONA system. So it's not going to be too big of a deal, but we'll definitely make sure that you have enough time to do that, learn about SONA, and put it into IRB protocol. But the study information sheet and the document questionnaire that we uploaded, that for sure, we're looking for that January 31st deadline on. All right, any other questions, concerns about anything? All right, so that is it for today. So that was the IRB procedure, not too bad. So get going on that. And again, if you have any questions that pop up, Erica is a wonderful resource. So many of the, most of you are going to be pretty straightforward, but if anything pops up where you're like, ooh, I really wonder if I can do that, or, I downloaded this new app on my phone that allows me to access Qualtrics. Can I use that? She is an amazing resource. Just send her an email and just ask her that question, because she wants us to make our protocols as good as possible so that when they finally get to her, it's just check, 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 check. Everything's good, rather than, oh my gosh, what do they mean by this? I'm confused here. I don't know what's going on here. So use her as a resource. She's amazing, and let's get this done. Other than that, we are done for today.